Greece joined World War I late as the conflict was all but decided, missing out on excellent deals from Britain for Cyprus and Western Anatolia. After entering in 1917, they fought valiantly to retake their historic lands and reform the Byzantine Empire, a plan known as the Megali idea. Despite winning the Great War and getting all this from the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920, the Hellenes lost the Greco-Turkish War, lasting from 1919 to 1922, and sadly failed to revive the Roman Empire. But don't get down, you over 18,000 Byzantines and the 90% who haven't subscribed yet. History is forever changed in July 1914 as the Great War broke out. King Constantine, who favored Germany and wanted to remain neutral, similar to King Ferdinand in Romania, anticipated the conflict would arrive in Greece and secretly began preparing the army for conflict. In August, while inspecting the military with his son, Prince George, the two were blown up in their vehicle by Turks, leaving the 21-year-old Alexander as king. Alexander was popular both at home and abroad, and was ambivalent towards the Entente and the Central Powers, but was a staunch supporter of Eleftherios Venizelos, the pro-Entente prime minister. In January 1915, the British offered Alexander massive Anatolian lands if he would enter and defend Serbia, but he would have to cede Macedonia to Bulgaria. This offer was rejected. A few months later, in the midst of the Gallipoli campaign, on October 16, 1915, Britain still asked Greece to join the conflict, offering Cyprus as well, but made no guarantees on Constantinople. With the army in a far better position, the Greeks entered the war against Bulgaria in November. The Bulgars sent their army south to Macedonia and east to Serbia to join the Austro-Hungarians, believing the Serbs and Greeks would quickly collapse. This proved incorrect, and the failure to quickly and decisively end the conflict caused massive morale issues and led to political instability at home. The strengthened Greek army drove them back after a few weeks, seizing western Bulgaria, threatening Sofia, before the fighting slowed and continued. The British had been fighting in the Gallipoli campaign since February 1915, and the Greek reinforcements were much needed when they arrived in December. Their forces were pinned down at the beachhead on the Bosphorus, so the Hellenes sent transports on the Aegean, opening a new front for the Ottomans, resulting in victorious battles for the Greeks. Eventually, the Ottomans in Thrace were encircled and eliminated by March 1916, as Ataturk died. Within a few weeks of the successful campaign, the Bulgars dropped out of the war as things became increasingly unstable at home as the Greeks pushed into eastern Rumelia, ceding ethnic Greek lands and dropping their claim to Macedonia and Thrace. This left Greece with complete control of the western Aegean. The Tsar's popularity crashed, but the government did not collapse, similar to the Second Balkan War. The main body of Greek troops were now free to push east and retook Adrianople. Upon the victory, the army immediately pushed east to Constantinople without notifying the British, similar to how they acquired Thessalonica in the Second Balkan War. When they reached the Queen of Cities, they entered in for a long siege. The British elected to focus on saving Serbia rather than besieging Constantinople. By May, Churchill's British expeditionary forces reached Serbia as it continued to fight alongside some small Greek reinforcements, forcing Austria to focus on the Balkans. The front quickly developed into the same type of trench warfare present in the Western Front, quickly bogging to a halt. Romania then joined the war, opening another front for Austria, but their army was extremely weak and ineffective. The rest of the Greek army did not join the siege at Constantinople, instead focusing on cutting supplies, preparing for the next major campaign, Smyrna, landing in September, further stretching the Ottomans thin. The Hellenes made further landings in Anatolia at Avili and Phocaea, as the Smyrna campaign evolved into the Ionian front, with the Greeks consolidating control in the mountainous region. The first push was south to stabilize the front at the Meander River. After securing the north side of the river, they moved north to choke out Constantinople. The United States entered the war on April 2nd, spelling the inevitable collapse of the Central Powers, while Russia began to collapse. But the Romanovs had more time to flee as the situation was not as bad as Austria never focused on the east. Instead of seeking asylum from the British, who refused them, the Romanovs fled south to their Orthodox brethren in Greece. By October, the Greeks controlled both sides of the Dardanelles before the Ionian army captured Bursa, one of the major Ottoman cities. The Armenians and Hellenes within the city sabotaged the Ottomans and welcomed the Greeks as liberators, with few Turks surviving. They quickly moved north and besieged Nicomedia, the last holdout before Constantinople. In January, the Greeks pushed east to take Magnesia. They also retook the city of Philadelphia on the 18th, the last mainland Anatolian city of the Eastern Romans that was lost to the Ottomans in 1390. Magnesia fell in February after a relatively quick battle. At the same time, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan all declared independence from Russia. Nicomedia fell in March, cutting off all supply lines to Constantinople. The siege of Constantinople had been ongoing for over a year in Thrace, but the lack of supplies was a death blow to the defenders. Orthodox priests reminded the soldiers that the angels of heaven, alongside the souls of Constantine, Justinian, Heraclius, and Basil II, were watching from above and aiding them. The Golden Gate of Constantinople fell in vain, signaling the end of the siege. Fulfilling the ancient prophecies, the marble body of Constantine XI, the last Roman emperor, was discovered, when a great ox heralded the oncoming Greek army. The city was mercilessly bombarded, with the Turks inside, running out of men and supplies as the morale plummeted, while the Hellenes were on the verge of retaking their most precious possession. The Patriarch and many Greek soldiers claimed Constantine came to life and aided with the siege before going up to heaven. On May 29th, exactly 465 years since the Ottomans stole the city, the Hellenes triumphantly re-entered, liberating it from the Turkish occupiers. The Greeks and Armenians inside rejoiced with all the Byzantine prophecies coming true, as the Pashas, alongside the Caliph, were slain. In the east, Armenia invaded the Ottomans, eager to retake their historic lands and repay the Turks for the atrocities they had committed against them throughout the war and the previous centuries. The Treaty of Saint-Germain was signed on September 10, 1919, officially dissolving Austria, but Serbia pushed deep into Hungary, eager for revenge. Hungary refused to back down, until eventually agreeing to the Treaty of Trianon on June 4, 1920, establishing the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, better known as Yugoslavia. Greece and Yugoslavia partitioned Albania between themselves. In Anatolia, the Hellenes pushed on, but the Ottomans were in complete collapse, signing the Treaty of Sèvres on August 10, 1920. In recognition for the major contributions against the Ottomans, Greece gained eastern Thrace, Bithynia, Ionia, Aeolia, and Cyprus, as previously agreed with by the UK. The British tried to force the Hellenes to turn Constantinople into an international zone, but France and the US rejected the British proposal, and the Greeks refused to even contend it. Eventually, the British were given a military port in the Sea of Marmara, similar to Gibraltar, alongside trade agreements through the Straits. In return, the British returned the ancient Hellenic sculptures from the Parthenon and the Acropolis, stolen by Thomas Bruce between 1812 and 1816, greatly increasing Alexander's popularity. After heavy financial incentives, Italy renounced the Dodecanese, returning Rhodes to Greece for recognition and support of their Anatolian claims in Lycia. Despite these treaties, the Greco-Turkish War had been raging since May 1919. The Young Turks cooed the Ottoman remnants and declared war upon Greece and Armenia. However, without Ataturk, they were led by Topal Osman, who kicked off the war by taking Lycia from the Italians. Eventually, the Italians gave up on their Anatolian dreams and exited the war shamefully. The Greeks achieved a major victory at the Battle of Tabassium, completely destroying the birthplace of the Ottomans. Another Turkish army was decimated by a combined Armenian-Assyrian one at Manzikert, causing massive celebrations throughout Greece. Without Ataturk, the Young Turks' government was trounced in battle after battle, forcing them to eliminate Pontic Hellenes in revenge, just as they had done with the Armenians and Assyrians, who were able to secure their statehood as they resisted the Turks and kept the Soviets out. Eventually, the Greeks took Ankara and crushed the Young Turks, forcing them to the negotiating table at the Treaty of Lausanne, solidifying the Sykes-Picot Agreement from 1916. France solidified its previously agreed-upon Anatolian holdings from 1916, while Hellas took Doris, Lycia, and Pontus from the Turks, with Pontus being similar to East Prussia for Germany. Armenia was greatly increased, pushing into Anatolia, receiving the lands originally given to Russia in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. A small Assyrian state, as well as a Kurdish state, were also established as French protectorates. Ironically, the Greeks reinstated the Ottomans as a mere rump state, who recognized Hellenic control over Constantinople. The Ottomans mirrored Hungary, ruled by a regent, Mustafa Sabri, a staunch critic of the Young Turks, and had no sultan. Focusing on Hellas, Patriarch Basil III declared Constantine XI a saint, as Greece built a massive 300-foot-tall marble statue of the so-called Marble Emperor in Constantinople, being viewed as the new Colossus of Rhodes for the Greeks and the Orthodox faith. Restoration began on the Hagia Sophia, which was converted back into an Orthodox cathedral. The blasphemous minarets were torn down, and a massive cross was put on the dome of the church. New marblework and mosaics also began. Greece kept strict adherence to state orthodoxy, as religion became the determinant for your identity. All Orthodox were considered Greeks, while Muslims were considered Turks. This increased religious fervor, and Greece never became a democracy. The autocephalous Church of Greece that had been forcibly split from Constantinople in 1833, led by Athens, was folded back under the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. The autocephalous Church of Cyprus was not, however, as it is recognized as the first Greek Orthodox autocephalous church, being formed in 431 under the reign of Emperor Theodosius II. Politics were quite stable, as Alexander and Venizelos were popular and loved. The white immigrants, remnant of the white movements in Russia, were welcomed in and given land in the depopulated areas of eastern Thrace. Instead of viewing themselves as the successors of the classical Greeks, they heavily drew upon their Byzantine forefathers. The upper house of parliament was renamed the Senate, comprising the military, the phanariates, and the landed nobility. In 1928, the Hagia Sophia restoration was finished. The first actions inside the cathedral was the coronation of Alexander as the new Roman emperor, Alexander II, the Restorer. The nation changed its name from the Kingdom of Greece to the Emperor of Romania. They were known as Byzantium in the west, just as they were previously known as Greece instead of Hellas. Alexander changed his family name from Glucksburg to Constantino to sound more Hellenic, claiming a lineage from Constantine the Great. This mirrored the British royals changing from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor. Alexander's son, Basil III, was also christened inside the Hagia Sophia, signaling Bulgarian ambitions held by the Byzantines. This was immensely popular at home, but controversial abroad. Bulgaria, the Ottomans, and Italy were all irate. Mussolini was livid, dreaming of restoring Rome himself, cutting ties between the two nations and refusing to recognize the transition. France was excited as Byzantium and Armenia joined the Little Entente, which had developed far beyond the anti-Hungarian faction it started as. Romania and Yugoslavia, other members and fellow Orthodox nations, were also pleased by the news. The Byzantine military rapidly modernized and improved due to the White Russians, overhauling the armed forces into the best in the Mediterranean, weakening Italy's position. Their economy also followed suit, becoming slightly larger than the Italians due to their strategic position. Following the death of Venizelos in 1936, Alexander took more power as subsequent prime ministers became puppets to the emperor. As tensions rose throughout Europe, Byzantium, Yugoslavia, and Romania signed a secret treaty to partition Bulgaria as all three ramped up their militaries. The Second World War kicked off in 1939, with the Byzantines staying neutral, but drastically increasing their army, almost rivaling that of France. They sent some of their army to aid Yugoslavia, cracking down on the Croatian nationalists, giving the Yugoslavs time to strengthen. On August 30th, 1940, Germany tried to force Romania and Yugoslavia to surrender land to Hungary and Bulgaria, but backed by Byzantium, they refused. A few days later, on September 6th, Carol II was forced to abdicate the Romanian throne, with the Byzantines strongly supporting the young and popular King Michael I, helping him overthrow the German-backed government of Antonescu. All these actions enraged the Germans, Italians, and Bulgarians. In October, the Axis invaded Yugoslavia, who was supported by Romania and Byzantium. The campaign was brutal and slow. Bulgaria joined the Axis, allowing them to push deeper, but were curb-stomped within a few months by the Samakya and partitioned. Simultaneously, Vichy France and Germany backed a Turkish fascist coup, creating a nationalist government to invade Byzantium. The superior Byzantine army demolished the Turks by December, taking huge chunks of Anatolia, reducing the Turks to a small puppet state. Over 5 million people were forcibly resettled. Byzantium continued onward into Vichy Levant. Italy launched a naval invasion of Byzantium in 1941, fighting a series of indecisive battles with heavy casualties, but the invasion was prevented. The Yugoslavs were on the brink of collapse, so the Karađorđevićes fled to Byzantium alongside 400,000 soldiers and 2 million Serbs, before Germany destroyed the kingdom. Italy pushed to invade Greece, but Germany signed an armistice with Byzantium and Romania, shifting towards Operation Barbarossa. The Balkans were partitioned, Vichy France sold their holdings in the Levant as Britain was about to take them. The Axis recognized the Anatolian changes, and Romania began supplying Germany with oil. Byzantium strengthened ties with Armenia and Kurdistan, ceding borderlands. In May, the Anglo-Iraqi War commenced after the Axis-backed Rashid Ali al-Gailani's Arab nationalist coup, overthrowing the British puppet government. Byzantium, Kurdistan, and Assyria sided with Britain as the war quickly ended. Iraq was partitioned, and the Byzantine puppet state of Mesopotamia was created, while the old government was reinstated. The Axis were furious, but turned a blind eye, wanting to draw Byzantium into a war with Russia. On June 22nd, the Germans invaded the USSR, catching them off guard. Romania was offered Bessarabia and North Bukovina if the Iron Guard was legalized, but Romania declined. On July 18th, after pressure from the white immigrants, Byzantium sent 600,000 men, mainly Russians, to take Crimea, well ahead of the Germans. The Byzantines besieged Sevastopol with 200,000 men and secured the peninsula, before pushing into Ukraine and Kuban, forcing Soviet soldiers to retreat faster. In Iran, Reza Shah refused to remove the Germans and was replaced with Crown Prince Mohammad Reza Pahlavi after the one-week-long Anglo-Armenian Soviet invasion. Armenia and Assyria took borderlands, while Britain and Russia created spheres of influence. The Byzantine force received Ukrainian support, with the Holodomor still fresh in their minds. Kherson, Rostov, and Krasnodar quickly fell. The Soviets regrouped and crushed the Byzantines at Voroshilовgrad. Constantinople had hoped the expedition could topple the Bolsheviks and reinstate the Romanovs, but Voroshilовgrad ended these dreams. German troops reached Ukraine in September, but focused on the Soviets. Sevastopol finally fell in November, giving Byzantium all of Crimea. The Battle of Moscow and Leningrad began, and the fresher German troops captured Moscow after 3 months. Britain feared Soviet collapse was imminent as their supply lines were destroyed. With winter coming, the Byzantine forces set up defenses. Byzantium mobilized another 2 million men and began negotiations with both sides, but found issues with the German regime and the Soviets. Churchill received support for his Danubian Federation, but Byzantium demanded Palestine, crucial for domestic Orthodox propaganda. Additionally, Ethiopia would take Eritrea and Somalia from Italy. The two nations had built a strong brotherhood following World War I. Byzantium wanted to help build them into a new Japan, and this would cement Constantinople as a protector of Orthodox states. The Byzantines would only withdraw back to Crimea and the coast of Kuban, steep terms for Russia, which would be humiliated by resigning these lands, so refused, collapsing negotiations. In the midst of parley, the Germans besieged Stalingrad, trying to cut off the Soviets from the Caucasus oil fields. Germany promised neutrality should Byzantium invade Italy, who had proved themselves incompetent, and permit them to take all of North Africa. The Romans showed themselves far more capable than Italy had, and would be a stronger ally. Constantinople dictated the war's outcome. If they joined the Axis, their reinforcements would win Barbarossa for Germany. If they joined the Allies, they could annihilate the Germans. Hence, the future rested in the hands of the Roman Basileus. 1.3 million soldiers moved into Crimea, awaiting orders, panicking the Soviets. The troops initiated mass migrations of their Slavic collaborators, Russians, Cossacks, Ukrainians, and Poles, south to Anatolia. Debate was fierce in Constantinople, as many whites wanted to fight the Reds, but Germany made clear the Tsar would not be reinstated following their victory. They reopened talks with Russia, setting harsher terms. Russia relented, signing the secret Chersonesus Accord in July of 42. The Black Sea would become a Roman lake once more. The Carthaginian terms were designed to induce a war with the Soviets in the future, placating the Byzantine Russians. Romania and Byzantium invaded the Axis without warning. The Byzantine navy cut behind them in Africa, seizing Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, while Romania moved into Bessarabia. Africa became a rout, and the rest of Libya was handed to France, their main western ally, with the Axis completely out in December. Concurrently, their troops moved, inflicting crushing blows on the Germans, enabling massive Soviet counterattacks. Germany obliterated themselves and the Soviets by Operation Barbarossa. 16 million people fled during the campaign, 3 million of them receiving free land in Anatolia under the Christian anti-communist Byzantines. The Germans were pushed out of Moscow in May of 43 and Stalingrad in June, while the successful Battle of Sicily began, lasting 6 weeks, forcing Germany to divert troops out of Russia, leading to another Soviet wave of counterattacks. The exhausted Germans were slowly driven back by the Greco-Soviet assault. On July 25th, the Italian government was overthrown. By August, Germans arrived in Italy and the Balkans, stabilizing the front, before Italy dropped out of the war in September. Deposed Yugoslav king Peter II called on the Serbs to rebel against the Croatians and Germans, inciting mass partisan efforts, destabilizing the region, allowing the Byzantines to push in. Ethiopia pushed out the last Italians in October with British support. Hungary saw all was lost and tried to make a separate peace, but Germany effectively took over their government. Romania, Yugoslavia, and Byzantium agreed to place Otto von Habsburg as the king of the Danubian monarchy, which would join the Symmachia, which would not align itself with the West, as they believed Western coups were more likely to overthrow them than communists. Budapest fell to Romania in May of 44, ending the nationalist regime. Otto von Habsburg was quickly coronated the Hungarian king to establish legitimacy for their Danubian plan, enraging FDR, who believed that the Danube would become a democracy, souring ties to the states. Otto agreed to redraw the borders once the war was over, as seizing land was crucial for their long-term stability. D-Day commenced on June 6th as the Allies began pushing in France. Warsaw fell to the Soviets in July. Allied troops pushed deeper into Italy, while Yugoslavia was fully liberated in August. A Greco-Slavic army took Istria and pushed into Venice. The city submitted to the invading army, but the Byzantines looted St. Mark's Cathedral, shipping back the stolen artifacts from the Fourth Crusade in 1204, retaking the Hippodrome horses. Germans retreated home to defend against the Soviets. Italy was fully liberated by mid-October. The Russians moved into Germany in November, while the Allies were still in France. Britain and America panicked, sending naval invasions to Denmark and the Netherlands to prevent the Baltics from becoming a Soviet lake. By the year's end, Symmachus took Pressburg, Prague, and Vienna, with Otto coronated as the king of the Danube. The Soviets took Berlin in January of 45, triggering a dash towards the Rhine. Symmachus conquered the rest of Austria and moved into Bavaria. Denmark and Holland were liberated in February, and the Allies made small inroads in Lower Saxony, but Russia occupied most of the eastern Rhine. The entire German south was occupied by the Symmachus troops. South Tyrol, occupied by Byzantium, was transferred to the Danube without British or American consent. The German instrument of surrender was signed in March, ending the European front of World War II. In July, the Potsdam Agreement was signed. Negotiations were tense as the Soviets occupied most of Germany, and the Symmachists made it clear they were not subservient to Britain or America. New Soviet regimes were established in Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. The USSR annexed Königsberg, which was renamed to Kaliningrad. France wanted to divide the Rhineland between itself, Belgium, and Holland. The Symmachists supported this, but Britain and America refused. A Western-backed Rhinish state was instead formed, while the Netherlands received the sliver of German lands. The Danubian monarchy was recognized, combining southern Germany, Austria, parts of Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. The eastern Hungarian borders were redrawn to better reflect demographics, and Hungary renounced their claims on Transylvania. It combined multiple autonomous provinces into a federal kingdom under the Habsburgs, and joined the Symmachia. The Allies and the Symmachists disagreed over Italy, as Yugoslavia and Byzantium wanted the kingdom to either join the Symmachia or be occupied and carved up. Constantinople desperately wanted Sicily and the Greco parts of southern Italy, but were forced to back down after the UK accepted the transfer of South Tyrol. Yugoslavia was given Istria, Fiume, Zara, and Trieste, and their old lands were returned by Romania and Byzantium. The Byzantine conquest in Anatolia, the dissolvement of Bulgaria, and the annexation of Libya were all accepted. The rest of Libya was given to France, who acknowledged Roman suzerainty over the Levant. Byzantium made it clear that Palestine would not become a Jewish homeland, rejecting the Jewish territorial organization, angering America and Britain. Potential states for the Jews were drawn up, but no Jewish state was formed, as the JTO couldn't agree on a location. On September 2nd, Japan surrendered to the US. The American use of nuclear weapons prompted the Byzantines to begin their own nuclear program secretly. The 1946 Italian institutional referendum decided if Italy should remain a monarchy or become a republic. It was extremely close, with the Republicans winning. Byzantium and the Symmachists denounced the result as fraudulent, blaming communist agents. Riots broke out, and the Republicans killed 9 monarchists in Naples at a monarchist march. Byzantium offered King Umberto support in him destroying the northern communists. Umberto agreed, and much of the Italian military command backed the king. Within a week, the Byzantines used the Naples massacre as justification and marched in unopposed. They joined up with the southern Italian soldiers and seized Rome. Umberto was wary of a bloody civil war, and Britain warned them against this, causing him to offer to split Italy into a northern republic and a southern monarchy. Republicans complained internationally, but they would have elected a communist into power without the South, so the West ignored them. After 1 week, the North accepted the partition. Rome remained the kingdom's capital, while Florence became the capital of the new Italian Republic. The kingdom fell under Byzantine sway and joined the Samachia. British troops withdrew from Palestine in 1947, while 600,000 Byzantine soldiers moved in. They immediately came to blows with the Arabs, leading to the 4-month-long Byzantine-Arab War, where 900,000 Palestinian Muslims fled. Byzantium promised the Jews autonomous zones, so they stayed out of the conflict. Following the war, the Byzantines began a 5-year resettlement campaign, bringing in 1.2 million Greeks, Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, and Bulgarians to the region, with Christians becoming the vast majority of the population. The 136,000 native Christians were given the same special privileges as the native Christians in Lebanon and Syria. Spain declared itself a monarchy once more, but the regime opposed Juan, Count of Barcelona, as he was too liberal. Byzantium pressured them to coronate a monarch, so Jaime, Duke of Segovia, was crowned. His ideology matched the Phalangists, and he agreed that his 11-year-old son, Alfonso, Duke of Anjou and Cadiz, would marry a granddaughter of Franco in the future. The Byzantine Empire cemented itself as a global power. Imperial culture was militaristic, akin to Prussia. All men over 18 had to serve 2 years in the military. They needed to deter the Soviets and develop their military in the second strongest on the continent. The empire had around 34 million people, the 11th largest global population. Most of the Slavs colonized the new lands in Anatolia and the Levant. Cyrenaica and Jerusalem saw the largest Greek colonization efforts. Imperial culture developed beyond the Hellenic one of the early 20th century, as Roman became the ethnic identity for the Greeks as it had been in medieval times. First-wave Russians formed an Anatolian hybrid, Romaic Russian culture known as Rus culture. Similar to ancient Rome, official documents were bilingual, in Romaic and Russian. Citizenship also mirrored the classical days. Anyone could become a Roman citizen, but the Greeks here considered themselves true Romans. All Christians within the empire were granted citizenship, as any form of Christianity was required for full citizenship. Military service and conversion were necessary for any non-citizen to become a full citizen. The Basileus had taken more power during the war. The facade of constitutionality was still present, but the parties approved by the emperor were run by different dynasties. Each demographic had their own approved dynasty representing them in the government. The Financial Treaty Organization, consisting of these nations, was a multilateral economic union founded by Constantinople to create an independent economic system from the West. Byzantium gave considerable aid to Ethiopia, spurring modernization. Religion was crucial for the empire as it relied on devout Christians, who made up about 90% of the empire, albeit across different forms and rites. Greek Orthodoxy was the official imperial religion, but all Christian branches were protected by the state and given privileges over non-Christians. Orthodox exarchates were established for the Russians, Serbs, and Bulgarians within the jurisdictions of Constantinople, Antioch, and Jerusalem. 2 Soviet-backed uprisings erupted in Yugoslavia and Romania in 1947, but these failed. Byzantium shifted their domestic policy as a result. Any anti-imperial ideology, such as communism, fascism, and republicanism, were banned. Anyone suspected of supporting these destabilizing principles was blacklisted or arrested. The IIS, Imperial Intelligence Service, was created amidst growing tensions with America and the USSR, as they wanted to root out foreign influence. The agency quickly uncovered and foiled a Soviet operation to destabilize Crimea. In 1948, the IIS discovered the West was forming an anti-communist alliance, so Constantinople acted quickly, creating the JDO, the Jerusalem Defense Organization. Its founding members were Byzantium, Yugoslavia, Romania, Armenia, Georgia, Assyria, Kurdistan, Mesopotamia, the Danubian Monarchy, South Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Ethiopia. Each member was staunchly traditional, anti-communist, and anti-democratic. France, the founder of the Little Entente, the JDO's ancestor, strengthened ties with the group but did not join. A few months later, the US created NATO. With friction rising between NATO, the RDO, and the Communists, the Cold War had well and truly begun. The OAI positioned itself as the stalwart of the Old World against the evils of liberalization. Moscow and Washington disregarded it until successful Byzantine nuclear tests in 1950 forced its way as a major player. The three major factions were NATO and the West, anti-communist and anti-monarchist republics and democracies, the Warsaw Pact and communists, anti-monarchist and anti-democratic communist regimes, and the OAI, anti-democratic and anti-communist, mainly monarchies. All three, armed with nuclear weapons, engaged in proxy wars. Byzantium's principal rival was the Soviets, with whom they had a tense relationship, especially over Crimea. Taken by the Russian Romans in World War II, solely to increase tensions with the Soviets, Byzantium refused to return it after the war, citing ancient Greek colonies, the Bosporan Kingdom, and the Principality of Theodoro as legitimate reasons for Roman control. Nuclear missiles stationed there prevented a Soviet invasion, prompting the Soviets to station their own nukes nearby, threatening Constantinople, Yerevan, Tbilisi, and Bucharest. In response, Constantinople funded rebels in Dagestan, Kazakhstan, Poland, and Ukraine, while Moscow supported communist rebels in Bulgaria, Croatia, Turkey, and the Levant throughout the Cold War. But neither side did more than slightly unsettle their enemy. In 1952, Gamal Abdel Nasser led the Free Officers Movement, supported by the US, overthrowing King Farouk of Egypt, calling for all Arabs to rise and form a pan-Arab nation. The Republic of Egypt was established, nationalizing the economy, worrying Britain and Byzantium. This devastated the Copts, the pre-Arab Christian Egyptians, as Nasser's economic policies stripped them of their wealth. He attempted to suppress their identity into an Arab one, and went even further to the liberties of the foreigners living in Egypt, mainly Greeks, British, French, and Italians. When Egypt seized the Suez Canal in 1956, the Brits were ready to invade, backed by France and Byzantium. The three superpowers overwhelmed the Egyptians, but Eisenhower threatened all three, humiliating France and Britain. Despite the president's bully pulpit, the Roman Basileus refused his demands as Byzantium never received aid from the Marshall Plan, so were politically and economically independent from the US dollar. Emperor Alexander famously retorted, "We have prepared for this day in our hearts since the devastation of 639, the date of the Arab conquest of Egypt. America is but a breath. Her days are like a passing shadow within our 3,000-year history." He went on to cite the defense of Copts and Greek businesses in Alexandria, but in reality, he didn't want to appear weak to the Soviets and viewed Egypt as a chance to truly re-cement Rome's prestige. Once France and Britain withdrew, Alexander saw the necessity of gathering more soldiers. Modeled after the French Foreign Legion, the Varangians were renewed. Any Christian man could join the army and later become a Roman citizen after their service. Troops poured in, and the Varangians fluctuated anywhere between 10 to 30,000 soldiers depending on the time. The campaign was similar to their previous conquest in the Levant during the Second World War. Roman troops quickly took control of the Nile Delta despite fierce resistance from the locals. A member of the old Coptic nobility was proclaimed the new pharaoh of Egypt in 1957, establishing the Kingdom of Egypt under Byzantine protection. Similar to Mesopotamia, minority Christian rule was established. Egypt's capital was moved to Alexandria alongside the seat of the Coptic Pope. Alexandria was easy to supply for the Byzantine navy, and a Roman military base was built in the city. The Sinai Peninsula was given to Rome, a huge moral victory for the Church, as they reacquired St. Catherine's Monastery, the oldest continuous Christian monastery in the world, built by Justinian, and also the site of the burning bush for Moses, which is situated at the base of Mount Sinai. For the next 20 years, a constant presence of around 200,000 Romans occupied Egypt, enabling the creation of a modern Coptic force to defend themselves. During the occupation, Arabs received aid from the Soviets, prolonging the campaign, but, somewhat akin to the historical Holy Land, the original minority group received support from a dominant external neighbor and quickly outpopulated and removed the larger group. Pharaonism was heavily pushed by the new government. This was the idea that the Copts derived from a pre-Christian pharaonic Egyptian culture,
making them true Egyptians unlike the Arabs. This was done to cause racial strife, making the conquest far easier, and resulted in massive pogroms against the Arabs, forcing millions to flee. Amid the campaign, a Zionist uprising, backed by Bolsheviks and the West, shattered Palestine, seeking the creation of an independent Jewish Israel. A brutal war saw numerous Jewish and Christian holy sites desecrated as violence ran through the streets. By the end of the revolt, 260,000 Jews were slain. Following in Hadrian's footsteps, the remaining 1.2 million were deported as Judaism was banned from the Levant. This dragged out the Egyptian War, forcing Rome to remain until 1978. Despite the staggered withdrawal, a permanent force of 5,000 soldiers remained in Alexandria. Throughout the conflict, Copts rose from 20 to 70% of the population, replacing the Arabs. The Suez was never returned to Britain, instead falling into Coptic hands. Although the Egyptian War was a direct conflict for Rome, similar to the Korean and Vietnam Wars for the Americans, most of the Cold War consisted of surrogate conflicts. In 1958, Iraq suffered a military coup, but the Byzantines rescued Faisal II and defeated the forces of Abdul Salam Arif and Abd al-Karim Qasim, leading to the eventual merger of Iraq and Jordan into the Hashemite Arab Federation. This helped gain a valuable ally for Rome and came alongside lucrative rights for Iraqi oil fields. 3 years later, when Iraq declared war on Kuwait, Saudi and British forces mustered to its defense, but the Byzantines threatened direct intervention if Britain attacked Iraq. Despite the tense standoff, a compromise was reached, giving Britain the rights to some oil fields and allowing Iraq to retake Kuwait. When Iran was plagued with instability because of communist-influenced student movements, the OAI supported the Shah, having strengthened ties since World War II. Ruhollah Khomeini was assassinated and the Byzantines counter-couped the mullahs, restoring the Shahs and ensuring the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran. The restored Shah quickly joined the OAI to protect his state from the Soviets or Americans, meaning after 2,000 years of constant wars, Rome and Persia were finally allied together. Africa was plagued by a series of wars, as Kenya underwent the Mau Mau Rebellion in 1952, between communist rebels and the Commonwealth. Ethiopia was adamant the OAI backed their Kamba monarchist faction, leading to the creation of the Kingdom of Kenya by 1962, an Ethiopian puppet who joined Ethiopia's newly formed African Brotherhood. Sudan also faced a civil war, with the OAI backing the Christian rebels in the south, while the West and the Bolsheviks backed the Arab Muslims in the north. Once Britain left Sudan in 1956, the North fully oriented towards Moscow, prolonging the war until South Sudan won their independence in 1971, forming the Kingdom of Alodia and joining the African Brotherhood. The 1960 Congo crisis ended in a Soviet victory for Patrice Lumumba by 1971, a major victory for communism, though some southern regions gained independence from the Congo. Rhodesia was supported by the OAI because of its anti-communist stance, receiving military aid, leading to Ian Smith's victory in 1976. Though they were not formally accepted into the OAI, but allied with many of its members. In 1967, Tanzania embraced communism, leading to a civil war with the CIA-backed government gaining power by 1973. The OAI focused heavily on maintaining Portugal's empire, despite numerous uprisings in Africa fueled by the CIA and the Kremlin in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau. Portugal, led by Salazar, responded with violent repression, viewing the colonies as Portuguese provinces. India, mainly their Communist Party, invaded Dadra, Nagar Haveli, and Goa. The OAI labeled it as a Bolshevik attack on Christianity, while Portugal requested a UN ceasefire, but the Soviets vetoed it, so the entire OAI left the UN, claiming it was infiltrated by communists and Republicans to destroy the natural order of mankind. Reinforcements eventually defeated the Indians, and Portugal and India later normalized relations at London. With their empire intact, Portugal never left Macau, refusing to recognize the communists as a legitimate Chinese government. As their colonies increased ties to the mainland, Portugal truly became a pluricontinentalist state. So, with the various lands, Portugal invested into their provinces, building up their infrastructures, increasing their economic value. Instead of a common race, Portugal was held in unity through the Roman Catholic Church and a common tongue. With their empire's modernization, profits soon poured back home, meaning the National Union stayed in power beyond Salazar. Byzantium, recognizing their eastern allies as their main domestic concern, fearing an internal conflict, convened in Athens with Georgia, Armenia, Mesopotamia, and Kurdistan to redraw borders based on demographics. Armenia ceded northeastern Anatolia, largely populated by Georgians and Laz, to Georgia in exchange for eastern Trebizond from Byzantium, while Kurdistan expanded into Mesopotamia. France withdrew from Tunisia in 1956, but South Italy immediately invaded once the French had left. Once Rome discovered oil in Tripolitania, they bought the oil rights in Libya, rendering it their puppet. The French also left Morocco in 56, but Spain refused, backed by the OAI, kicking off the Moroccan War. The Moroccans were overrun and humiliated by their enemies as Spanish Morocco expanded. After Western pressure to grant Rhinish independence, France left NATO to keep their puppet. A year later, during the Algiers push to overthrow the Fourth Republic, the AYP assassinated de Gaulle, leaving Raoul Salan in power. As a highly decorated soldier and the founder of the paramilitary OAS, Salan was more conservative and anti-communist than de Gaulle, having no qualms working with the OAI to keep Algeria. By 1962, Salan defeated the FLN, executed Houari Boumediene, and Algeria remained French. Controlling Germany, the Soviets had the added industry to defeat the Americans in the space race. While they gained prestige, they poured way more money into it as their regimes decayed. By the early 80s, the USSR struggled with internal stagnation and a failing economy. Riots were constant in Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. The largest demonstrations in Moscow saw the police quickly gun down the dissenters, but this only fanned the flames. Revolts broke out across the Soviet regimes, and the Baltic states declared independence. As communism collapsed, some Soviet generals sided with the rebels, inciting chaos. Soviet troops quickly left Germany as they were needed to preserve the USSR, so Germany erupted into a civil war, composed of multiple factions who had radically different ideas on how to run the nation. By 1985, 3 million Germans had died, and the CIA-backed Republicans won, leading to Germany's admission into NATO. With Germany's collapse, communist governments fell across Eastern Europe. Republics were established in Poland and the Baltics, while Central Asian states declared independence. Czechoslovakia dissolved, with East Czechs joining the Danubian monarchy, and Slovakia forming a Western-style republic. Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine were embroiled in a massive conflict. When the Soviet regime was overthrown, 5 million Byzantine troops, a majority of whom were Anatolian Russians, poured into Russia, seizing the moment to reinstate the Tsar. Plus, the Basileus realized Russia was necessary for the survival of monarchism as a whole. The OAI, while strong, would quickly crumble to the growing Western system if they controlled Russia. With communism effectively ended, they would soon be forced to liberalize. A few major conditions were attached with the Roman aid. Moscow would not renew their claim as the Third Rome. The Russian Church would recognize Constantinople as the ultimate protector of orthodoxy. Russia would enter the OAI. Romania and Byzantium would cede lands back to Russia, who, in return, would renounce their claims to Romania, Georgia, or Armenia. But this was not all. The Basileus had a more sinister ambition as well: the total deportation of nearly 10 million Turks from Anatolia to Turkmenistan. As war raged, Poland prepared to retake their land stripped during World War II. The Tsarist forces swarmed over Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, seizing Kiev, Minsk, and Moscow. The new Romanov Tsar was crowned at Dormition Cathedral, and Russia joined the OAI. Their sights quickly turned west, where the Poles were almost at Kiev. Russia soon retook the city before peace talks were held with Poland. Kaliningrad, renamed Alexandrograd, was returned to Russia. Poland was guaranteed independence, with the border between the Styr and Siret rivers, when an alliance between Poland and the Baltics was recognized, but they could not join NATO. Once the peace was agreed, Russia received her lands from Romania and Byzantium. Russia campaigned in Central Asia, retaking Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan, who took in the deported Turks. Anatolian lands were settled with Greeks, Russians, and Bulgarians, erasing the remnants of the Turks, and the lands were fully incorporated into Byzantium. After nearly 1,000 years, the Romans had finally avenged an undone massacre, but through horrific means. Beneath the grandeur, Byzantium's newfound glory was built on the backs of millions of deaths massive expulsions, and an absolutist monarchical state where only Christians were real citizens. The Basileus ruled with an iron fist, as even the aristocratic parties within the Senate were the two hands by which the will of the emperor was reckoned. Byzantium had nearly 70 million citizens with a rapidly modernizing nation and lots of land. Throughout the Cold War, their people became more devoted to the emperor as any hope of democracy was destroyed. By the turn of the new millennium, Rome reigned as one of the globe's mightiest powers with strong allies, and Constantinople was once more the city of the world's desire. If you liked what you saw, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and if you want to get the maps and more, check out my Patreon or become a channel member. Don't forget to sign up for the Medieval America game. Goodbye.